between our countries, threaten free speech across the West because of the knock-on rollout effects of this legislation from us or from the European Union. So I've come today as well to be a klaxon, to say to you, don't allow, piece by piece, this to happen here in America. And you would be doing us and yourselves and all freedom-loving people a favour if your politicians and your businesses said to the British government, you've simply got this wrong. At what point did we become North Korea? Well, I think the Irish comedy writer found that out 2 days ago at Heathrow Airport. This is a genuinely worrying, concerning and shocking situation, and I thank you for the opportunity to come here today.
Thank you, Mr. Well said. Thank you, Mr. Farage. Professor Kaye, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you. I ask that my written statement be entered into the record. My name is David Kaye. I'm a law professor at the University of California, Irvine, where I research and teach in international law. I know something about censorship. From 2014 to 2020, I was the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression. In that role, I monitored a growing global assault on free speech. Among other things, I led a landmark effort to call out China's attacks on civil society. I detailed repression of media and criticism in Putin's Russia. I condemned Iran's suppression of dissent. And I even criticized democratic governments when they sought to force platforms to take down lawful speech. That is censorship. Violations of the human right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, guaranteed by Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, a treaty ratified by the United States in 1992. Inspired by the First Amendment, it guarantees a speaker's rights and the rights of everyone to access information. So it pains me that the United States, the country that had my back as special rapporteur, the land of the First Amendment's make no law, now leads the charge to undermine freedom of speech and of the press. The threat is real, live, and I think shocking given our nation's historic commitments. The administration follows a well-worn path. A few examples. The silencing of scientists and public health officials. Just last week, the head of the CDC was fired because she would not agree to change her conclusions about vaccines. The administration has scrubbed websites that doctors and parents use to make decisions. Censoring and punishing speech of visitors. In visa interviews and at the border, there are increasing reports of officers screening visitors according to their social media activity or detaining and deporting based on speech and op-eds. And the repeated assaults on the media, as we've seen attacks on public broadcasting, frivolous lawsuits against media outlets, and the decimation of Voice of America. This is the tip of an iceberg of censorship that should concern this committee and every American. Yet US officials who claim to be free speech warriors are spending their time looking abroad. Now, I know of nobody who argues that EU and British laws on speech are perfect. Still, the EU Digital Services Act and the UK Online Safety Act respond to problems both sides of the aisle in Congress have found serious but have yet to address: the enormous, opaque, and unaccountable power of a small number of massive tech companies over our information environments. The EU answered the question of massive platform power not by claiming new powers to take down content or accounts. It adopted new rules to empower users, including by requiring notice and an opportunity to appeal content moderation decisions. The Online Safety Act, championed by Labor and Conservative parties, was widely popular as an attempt to hold big tech accountable. It does have elements that concern me. Yet whatever faults it might have, it, like any other British law, is subject to legal challenge and review by courts for any violation of fundamental rights, just as we would expect of any democracy. Neither established censorship regimes. I encourage members of this committee to consider two things. First, instead of criticizing allied democracies, consider the kinds of content online that you find objectionable. Maybe it's anti-Semitic or Islamophobic content, misogyny, child endangerment, content glorifying terrorism or inciting violence. How do you propose to address those in a way that is consistent with free speech values? That's not an easy question, and it can't be waved away with just 3 words, because free speech. The EU and the UK have made their choices, subject to democratic judicial oversight, and acting in good faith. I think this committee could do the same. Second, this committee has the obligation to protect Americans' freedom of expression here at home. The administration is putting freedom of expression under direct attack, and I think oversight and constraint from this committee would make quite a bit of sense. That, I would respectfully submit, is the real threat to American speech and innovation, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. Well, one of the things we found out on our trip through Europe was that the U.S. innovates, China duplicates, and now the EU regulates. Mr. Reid, I have a question for you first. Reports estimate that complying with the EU's Digital Markets Act, the DMA, could cost American companies up to $1 billion every single year. That's not just a number on a page. Those costs ultimately fall on American workers, who will see fewer jobs, on consumers, who will face higher prices and fewer choices, and on entrepreneurs, who will have a harder time competing against subsidized foreign rivals. Mr. Reid, is it correct that these compliance costs affect our economy? And what does it mean for America if Europe is allowed to impose these kind of costs on U.S. innovation?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. The more detailed answer is that, unfortunately, Europe has taken an ex-ante approach to regulation. The United States has always done well with an ex post. As a small business entrepreneur, I actually want fraud to be gone after. I want deceptive practices to be reduced. But unfortunately, what we see in the EU is an ex-ante process that ups my compliance requirements without actually giving customers the certainty of the result. So it's absolutely raising costs. And for American developers, we see one of the largest problems is how do you get to those European customers if the first tranche you hit is paying a compliance lawyer to meet all of these tests?
Thank you. Mr. Price, our Federal Trade Commission Chairman Ferguson has warned the government regulation can stifle, obviously, competition and innovation, and in many cases, the government itself becomes the most dangerous of all the monopolies. Isn't it the DMA, is the DMA a perfect example of that? It kind of weaponizes and makes it burdensome with regulations. Can you give me your comments on the DMA and what do you think the status is right now?
I certainly agree that European regulation generally slows down competition. It creates a situation whereby companies are unable to innovate with any degree of speed because they're constantly looking over their shoulder towards regulators around compliance. DMA, a very good example of that. Not just the DMA, though. Of course, you have the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. You have the DSA, the Digital Services Act, and constantly more and more being added. It's been estimated in the digital market space alone since 2016. 30 pages of regulation existed at the time. We're now over 1,000 and growing. So the European Union's response to American innovation is more and more regulation, generally around nebulous concepts like safetyism and protecting consumers, but very often just, particularly with the DSA, to create, unfortunately, a censorship industrial complex, as I outlined. DMA, very good example of that as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reid, if I could come back to you, President Trump just secured a landmark commitment from the EU to address unjustified digital trade barriers. It was part of the US-EU trade deal. I'm hopeful that this will result in the EU kind of removing, and a lot of people we talked to in Europe when we were there said that there was a possibility that they could pull back on some of this. What action could President Trump take to hold the EU accountable to their commitment? And are there additional enforcement tools that Congress could provide to make that happen?
Well, I think, Congressman Fitzgerald, you've done great work in reaching out and sending letters to make it clear what the position of the United States government is on these issues. The reality is that the Europeans themselves, through the Draghi report, are recognizing that they have done a lot to harm those very same industries. We're hopeful that the United States can continue to use the careful power and the careful discussions through our trade negotiations and other actions to get them to step back. But we're here to talk about free speech, and so one of the things I would point out is we want the small businesses in Europe to also be able to speak and say, hey, we need these regulations pulled back.
So just to follow up to that then as well, a 2024 staff report by the Housing Oversight Committee found that FTC Chair Lina Khan was using taxpayer dollars to send agency quote-unquote liaisons to the EU to assist with the implementation of the Digital Markets Act. Mr. Reid, do you think it's appropriate for that type of consultation or for the use of taxpayer dollars to help a foreign country implement laws that unfairly discriminate against U.S. companies?
Well, we don't think taxpayer dollars should ever be used to unfairly discriminate against United States companies. We're hopeful that U.S. taxpayer dollars can be used to ensure open markets around the world and a safe environment for our entrepreneurs to succeed.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the subcommittee, or ranking member of the subcommittee, gentleman who made a big announcement this week. We're sorry to hear about, but we appreciate your service, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, there is a clear and present danger to free speech in America, but it is not across the Atlantic Ocean. It is right here in Washington, sitting in the Oval Office. At a time when the greatest threat to the First Amendment rights of Americans resides in the White House, our Republican colleagues have brought us here today to talk about Europe. They've invited a fringe politician from the United Kingdom to attack the laws regulating certain conduct online in his country and the European Union, laws that are intended to combat disinformation by hostile foreign actors, hate speech, and other fraudulent or criminal conduct. They have sounded the alarms about these foreign laws, but when it comes to the Trump administration's suppression of speech in this country, Republicans are curiously and dangerously silent. There is virtually no corner of society that Donald Trump and his administration have left untouched by their effort to impose their radical views on the American people and to stamp out dissent. Since taking office, President Trump and members of his administration have used the powers of the executive branch in an attempt to silence their political opponents by attacking our core democratic institutions, such as academia, the legal profession, and journalism. These are moves straight out of the authoritarian playbook. For example, the Trump administration has taken aim at colleges and universities, trying to bend them to its will by withholding billions of dollars in scientific research funding, a short-sighted move that will set back innovation in this country by decades. And in some cases, including at my alma mater of Columbia, it has demanded onerous conditions that infringe on academic freedom. On these same college campuses, students are being kidnapped for writing op-eds, and others are being deported for participating in protests. The Trump administration has also targeted disfavored law firms that dare to challenge the president or to hold him accountable, or simply for hiring an attorney who clashed with Trump in the past. Some have sadly capitulated to its campaign of extortion. The president has even taken aim at the arts and humanities, launching a hostile takeover of the Kennedy Center and censoring exhibits at the Smithsonian Institution, attempting to whitewash American history and to stamp out free expression. He has also engaged in a dangerous campaign of harassment and intimidation of the media. For example, last October, he sued CBS for $10 billion for editing a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris in a way he didn't like. Although this suit was widely ridiculed by First Amendment attorneys who called it meritless and absurd, Paramount, the parent company of CBS News, was desperate to win approval from the Trump-controlled FCC for its proposed multi-billion-dollar merger and felt pressure to settle this baseless lawsuit. Ultimately, it paid $16 million to settle the suit, and just days later, the FCC approved the merger. What a coincidence. This followed ABC's settlement of a similarly baseless Trump lawsuit for $15 million because of corporate pressure. And now the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch face their own $10 billion lawsuit from Donald Trump over the Journal's reporting that shed new light on Trump's well-documented relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not aware of any president in the past suing media companies or newspapers or television stations for free expression they didn't like. Professor Kay, the free press is essential to our democracy and the rule of law. Can you explain how President Trump's attacks on the news media and his attempts to sue them into silence impact freedom of expression and freedom of speech in this country?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nadler, and congratulations on your announcement this week. Well, I think it's important to note that when we're talking about attacks on the press, it's not just about attacks on the journalists themselves or the media outlets themselves. It's about every American's right of access to information. It's about the freedom of public debate that we get from a media that isn't intimidated either by suit or by criticism from the Oval Office or whatever it might be. And so I think it's really important to think about these kinds of attacks, not only as those on journalists, but on the entire information ecosystem. And I think it's also important for us to realize that we can't pick and choose what censorship we like and don't like. I think the chairman's statement was really correct when he said censorship used by people in power to censor critics, that's at the core. And we should be examining where do we see that. We tend to see that quite a bit in this country, I think in an unprecedented way.
In your testimony, you identified a number of threats to freedom of expression in the United States, including science and public health. It's also been reported that the government has a list of hundreds of words, ranging from issues related to climate change to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it essentially is banned from government websites and users to make funding decisions. Is this true?
I've seen those reports, and I understand that to be true as well, particularly the use of lists of words, essentially to censor research that would be conducted by scientists at universities and at national academies in the United States.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ranking member is recognized for unanimous consent. Understand?
Yes.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman. This is a minority fact sheet about the majority's report on the Digital Services Act.
Well, we'll look forward to reading that. Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I have another.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article published by Reuters on October 29th, 2024, titled Fact Check, UK Woman Jailed for Inciting Racial Hatred, Not Posting Hurtful Words, which confirms that Lucy Connolly pled guilty to inciting racial hatred and was not, as claimed in deceptive social media posts, punished merely for posting, quote, edgy words on the internet.
Without objection. I'm sure we'll be some comments about that later. And the gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Kay, being a fellow Californian, I'm sure you're aware and could correct the ranking member that our own governor has sued Fox for $787 million. Isn't that correct?
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, I didn't think you would be, but neither was the ranking member, apparently. MP Farage, do you have the equivalent of what the Professor Kay was talking about, which is the Article 19? You're a signatory to that international convention, if you will, on free speech. Do you feel that it is being observed in the UK?
Maybe a signatory to it, and we may. And the Prime Minister, today in the House of Commons was talking about free speech, and indeed when President Trump was with him in Scotland the other day, he talked about our proud history of free speech, but what people say and what they do are two very different things. And the argument is that the Online Safety Act, I'll repeat what I said earlier, may have been designed by the Tories with the best of intentions, but has turned out to be the sledgehammer that misses the nut. It's not protecting kids, and it is damaging.
So now, going back to the United States, you don't have a constitutional framework that is the equivalent of ours in that you have no First Amendment absolute guarantee. Is that correct?
It is correct. Our Constitution isn't in written form. It's based on common law that's evolved and adapted over centuries, and your founding fathers looked at the best bits that we had.
So it appears in Europe and in the UK, free speech is whatever the bloody members think it is at a given time, and it changes with the will of the people they elect. Is that right?
Yes, but I don't think at any point we've really had a proper debate about infringement of free speech until COVID. And I think COVID changed the game.
Okay.
I think the government, social media platforms, big media, suddenly there were arguments that needed to be made that were banned.
So, Mr. Reid, to your knowledge, and I would go to the professor, but he seems to be ill-informed even on our own governor's lawsuits. First Amendment. In the United States, you can sue for anything. Do you often win if you sue against institutions like Fox, Wall Street Journal? Isn't it true that effectively the First Amendment creates a tremendous shield against anything except malicious, deliberate lies?
Not my area of expertise. We can absolutely talk about apps, but as an American, yes, that is absolutely my understanding.
And you have no such protection, just the opposite. You have no idea in Europe or in Britain about what is going to be allowed or not allowed. In other words, you don't know where to call balls and strikes. You just simply have to pay the fines when you get to them.
Well, I only carry one passport, so I'm more aware of the American laws, but that is my understanding correct.
Okay, now, we do have a First Amendment, and we are a signatory to Article 19. So I'm going to go a little bit into opinion. Now, I'm the author of No Censorship on Our Shores, meaning, Mr. Price, I know you're familiar with it, I'm not going to tolerate censorship overseas and then have those people come to the United States. Now, Professor K may object to the idea that I'm not going to let people who have been involved in censorship come into the United States because I think it's unacceptable to get away with that overseas. But let's be reciprocal for a moment for Mr. Reid and for everyone. If we're seeing Europe and the UK and other countries stifle what we are guaranteed in the U.S., and particularly arrest somebody for what they said while on U.S. soils, shouldn't this administration be just as strong and reciprocal that we will not tolerate that activity even off our shores? And isn't that ultimately what the United States must make available to the world, essentially guarantee the First Amendment to anyone, anywhere, if they want to do business with the United States? Mr. Price.
The leadership of the United States on this issue has been transformative for the discussion in Europe. And from the President, Secretary Rubio, and the Vice President, they have transformed the issue, and I hope more comes.
So, to the fringe parliamentarian, as you were called, and probably the future Prime Minister, what say you?
Yes, for Mr. Nadler's benefit, it's a very big fringe, and we're doing rather well, but there we are. Look, if you were to follow, Mr. Eisler, the logic of your argument that you were to ban people from entering America who would pass legislation that was prejudicial against American companies or American citizens and would threaten them with potential arrest if they came across the other side of the pond. I think the practical difficulty with that is you'd have to ban the British government, the entire Labour Party. So I'm not sure in practical terms that it works, but I understand the sentiment.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me be clear. I am not here to defend the European laws, and I've often criticized the approach of European countries to internet-related issues. It's really generally wrong-headed. But I don't really think that's the point of this hearing. I think the real threat to the First Amendment isn't coming from Europe. It's coming from Republican-led states that have introduced bills to close the open internet, and most of all, from Donald Trump, who's actively trampling free speech here at home. I think it's rather absurd for this committee to spend our time criticizing laws we have no jurisdiction over while ignoring the countless ways the Trump administration is tearing up the First Amendment. If this committee is really serious about protecting free speech, we need to focus on the Trump administration's literal assault on the First Amendment that's happening right here at home. So, Professor Kaye, I have a series of questions for you. Do you think that arresting international students for being critical of U.S. foreign policy is an attack on the First Amendment?
Yes, absolutely.
And isn't that because it's not just the right of the person to speak, but the right of all the rest of us to hear? The First Amendment isn't just about the speaker, it's also about the listener. Isn't that correct?
Right, that's true.
Now, a federal judge agreed with you and with us, warning that arresting students for their views chills the speech of millions of Americans. The government can't punish speech simply because they don't like its content. This year, as has been mentioned by others, President Trump's FCC blocked the CBS merger until the network agreed to change its programming and install a so-called bias monitor. The head of 60 Minutes resigned, saying he could no longer make independent decisions about the news. Doesn't that sound like a violation of the First Amendment's guarantee of a free press?
It does, and I think it's important to underline that restrictions on free speech don't come just from a law or the police outside your door. It can come from a whole network of intimidation, of public attack that really does chill speech, including the kinds of attacks that lead to deportations of people who are here just to study.
Since January, the Trump administration has revoked over 6,000 student visas because the speech of these students didn't align with what Trump agreed with. And now they're doing the same to immigrants who are applying for citizenship. Does that raise First Amendment concerns, do you think?
I think it raises First Amendment concerns, but it's also in a broader way, it's raising concerns about our tolerance of dissent, of this government's tolerance of criticism. And not everything is specifically about the First Amendment and the ability to enforce it in our courts. Sometimes it's about leaders in our country actually promoting a culture of open debate and open access to information. The very things that we've heard a lot about already this morning, a kind of marketplace of ideas that some people still talk about, that's not just about what the law provides, that's also about how our leaders behave towards that kind of open debate.
The Federal Trade Commission held up a merger of two major advertising firms, Omnicom and Interpublic, until they agreed to run ads on X, essentially a government-ordered gift to Elon Musk. Isn't that a blatant violation of free speech standards, forcing private companies to promote speech they otherwise wouldn't?
It's certainly a kind of extensive use of the term of jawboning that has come up over the last several years. And it's a kind of pressure that absolutely interferes with free speech. And it's also the kind of weaponizing of our federal agencies in support of a particular actor, a particular business person.
It seems to me that these actions affect not just the companies or the individuals that are the target of this abuse, but they're also to scare off everyone else from engaging in that behavior. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what we're seeing right now with just this essentially a kind of avalanche of restrictions and intimidations of free speech in this country, that it's designed to chill that kind of debate. It's designed to chill whistleblowers, to chill scientists, to chill professors and students. I think that's essentially what we're witnessing right now.
My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent.
You see request from Gentleman Calford?
Yes, I ask unanimous consent that the Politico ad or news that was dated June 27, 2025, saying Gavin Newsom sues for $787 million be placed in the record.
Without objection. Mr. Price, has anything in the Digital Services Act changed in the last year?
No, sir.
Hasn't been amended, hasn't been changed at all?
No, sir.
So everything Mr. Breton wrote 1 year ago today, well, August 12, 2024. That's still in place, where he said to an American running an American company about an interview that was yet to happen, future happening interview, threatened this individual. Nothing in the law has changed that would change what actions this individual took.
Nothing in the law.
Just because Mr. Breton's gone doesn't mean Ms. Verkunen can't do the same darn thing, right?
Precisely.
Yeah, and that's the concern. Mr. Price, is this statement, "we need to take back our country," is that statement hate speech?
We don't really know what hate speech is. It's so vague, and that's the problem with it. I wouldn't regard that as hate speech.
Well, you may not, but the EU regulators do, because they had a workshop on May 25th where, this is part of our investigation, material we'd subpoenaed, they gave us this information. They said it is hate speech. That's a concern, right?
Yes, sir.
And it could be made by an American and be termed hate speech, and there could be some ramifications for Americans' First Amendment liberties. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Price, what's a trusted flagger?
A trusted flagger is an NGO or a private organization that's recognized under the DSA, and if they identify or a complaint has been made...
Wait. Recognized by who?
Oh, the terms of the DSA. Oh, and the national regulators and the commission as well.
Okay, and they do what? So they're recognized by the government. They're approved by the government.
Yes,
all right? And what do?
If they identify content that they regard as illegal content, the companies have to give priority to removing that content.
Oh, so people that the government approves tell companies what they can allow on their platform and what they can't, right?
That's correct, sir.
And the same people who approved these folks are the same people who conducted the workshop and said, we need to take back our country as hate speech. Is that fair to say?
That's correct, sir.
Yeah, and that's the concern. And what happens if these trusted flaggers approved by the government, the same government that says we need to take back our country as hate speech? By the way, I think that statement is made probably more by Democrats right now than Republicans. I think the head of the Democrat National Committee made that statement like 3 months ago at a big Democrat rally or something they were having. So the same people say that's hate speech, approve the trusted flaggers, who then tell the platforms what they can and can't have on their platform. And if they don't agree with what the trusted flaggers say, there's civil penalties. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Both under national law and the DSA, investigations begin, and there's a whole process that can result in enforcement and then ultimately crippling fines for companies.
And those crippling fines, those civil penalties can be what, 5%, 10% of global revenue, depending on the Online Services Act or the DSA?
Under the DSA, 6%.
6%? Wow, that's a lot of money because these are big companies, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Farage, it's not just civil penalties, though. And this is where it gets really scary. Because my understanding is there's criminal penalties, and I think in 2023 in the United Kingdom, there were 12,183 arrests for offensive posts. 12,000 people arrested for things they posted online that some trusted flagger approved by the government, the same government that says what's being said at the Democrat National Committee, we need to take back our country, is hate speech. That's a scary scenario. Is that right?
Yeah, they're massive statistics, and I mean, some of it comes under non-crime hate incidents. So you've said something on social media, someone's taken objection, and you get the knock at the door from the police sort of warning you that if you do this again, something may happen. And this has now been broadened out. I mean, Mr. Price made the point, what is hate speech? How do you define hate speech? And that's the problem, isn't it, with all of these laws, that we finish up in a position where local police forces, etc., have to choose their own interpretations. I think, again, as I said to you earlier, the timing of this hearing today is perfect because the head of the Metropolitan Police, who arrested Graham Linehan at Heathrow Airport, he's thrown the ball back now to the British Home Secretary and the government to say, please tell us, what is this law intended? What are we supposed as the police to do? So I think we're going to have a much more rapid debate about this. But my worry is it may get worse, if I may quickly. Because the Labour government now are intending to pass a law that has a definition of Islamophobia. They're intending to put that into law. And that effectively will mean that criticism of a religion, mocking of a religion, would become an offence. And that's totally against everything. Because, you know, we've always given the Pope a hard time. We've always given the Archbishop of Canterbury a hard time. So we're finishing up kind of with two-tier law and two-tier justice.
Well,
and that's very concerning.
I had one other question I'd like to give for maybe you and Mr. Price, if I could. Speaking of religion, tell me what performative prayer is. This is something we've seen and we've discovered in our investigative work. Maybe we'll start with Mr. Price, then go to Mr. Farage.
Yes, sir. We have a client at the moment who's been prosecuted or who was arrested in Bristol for a Christian pastor preaching about the differences between Christianity and Islam. He was then assaulted by a group of people identifying as Islamic people. The police arrived and they arrested him, not the people who assaulted him. This is the state of play in the United Kingdom in terms of free speech. And unfortunately, across Europe, I mean, I have a whole file of cases here where people have been arrested for criticisms of Islam, where they've been prosecuted. So things are getting pretty bad.
Yeah, that extends to abortion clinics, doesn't it? And the abortion debate in Britain and Europe is different to the abortion debate in America. It's in a different place. But we have seen people warned or arrested if they've been seen to be praying outside abortion clinics, even if they're doing it silently. Hence, it's performative in the sense they're doing that. You know, I'm afraid you now have to be a certain distance away from one of these clinics. But if other members of the public object and say that your praying there is causing them psychological harm, well, the police may intervene.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I comment on one of these issues, just very briefly?
I'm fine if the ranking member, okay. I may have to ask you a question after you comment. When you do that, go ahead.
I realize I'm opening the door.
Yeah.
I just wanted to note on this question of what is hate speech. First off, the question of identifying hate speech is not something that happens in a vacuum. In the UK, in Europe, there are very strict rules around the definition of hate speech that connect it not merely to speech, but to incitement. So it's incitement to violence or hatred or discrimination. And I think that's just an important baseline point, that this isn't just about pure speech, it's about the kind of speech that might lead to violence. And related to that, when you mentioned this hypothetical of take back our country, and is that hate speech? My understanding is that that came up in the context of a hypothetical related to persistent harassment of a Muslim girl. And that was the hypothetical. And the question was, in that particular context, did that constitute a kind of incitement to some violence against this young girl? So I think it's important to put some of these kinds of abstract questions into that kind of context.
Professor, did you agree with the Biden administration when they established the Disinformation Governance Board?
I didn't take a position on that. I do think that disinformation is an issue that
The government should be deciding what we can say and what we can't?
Absolutely not.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I'll give the ranking member a little extra time if he so desires. With that, I'll recognize the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And firstly, I was pleased to join on the Codell. And it was a very fine, good Codell. I appreciate the chair, my friend and my classmate from 2006. One of the things I found most heartening about the Codell, we had a tour of Parliament, and along with us were two conservative members who were, I think they were either in the House of Lords, maybe one was in the Lords and one was in the House of Commons, but they talked to us about Magna Carta and about how it's the basis of our laws, and there was a copy there and copies here and there and whatever, but how precious the Magna Carta is. And they suggested to us that a legislator, this was in the House of Lords where we spoke, that a legislator is not somebody who votes. A legislator's job is not just to vote. A legislator's job is to stand up to an out-of-control executive. Very telling for British Parliament members to instruct us on what we should be doing, and I thank him for that. I'm a strong supporter of free speech and always have been, but I find this hearing a bit disingenuous because of the problems we have here in America. Free speech includes the speech of those with whom we disagree, people who say vile things, and in my case, I find racist and anti-Semitic and Islamophobic type speech is something I find foul, but it's protected by free speech and offensive speech as well. That does not mean that there aren't limitations, however, and speech can be harmful, dangerous, and infringe on other people's rights. It isn't a free-for-all, though. And the U.S. and our First Amendment does not have a monopoly on what constitutes free speech. There is speech protected by the First Amendment, like corporate political donations, which I think is misplaced and misapplied. And there are times when our legal system itself suppresses disfavored speech. I passed the Speech Act in the 111th Congress. I think Mr. Issa was my co-sponsor, and it dealt with the fact that Britain is a favored nation for defamation actions, and it's easy to get a defamation judgment there. We would not allow those judgments to be recognized here in our country under the Speech Act if the activities that took place did not conform to our laws on free speech. And I would think Mr. Farage could try to look at changing their laws on defamation and contour more to what we see in the First Amendment. And that might be good for the people in England. Two of my good friends, most revered friends, were from England, London, Christopher Hitchens and Sir Bill Browder. And they've written books, and they could be subject to such laws as well. But work on protecting your English authors. From Shakespeare on, they've been pretty good. We used to be bipartisan in these efforts to look out for free speech, but President Trump has taken on free speech in ways that would never been thought about. And I think Mr. Lofgren brought some points to Professor Kay. And it's not just laws, it's autocratic actions as well. President Trump, as Mr. Dalio said clearly, but so many other people have said it, felt it, is bringing us on the verge of an autocratic state. And his actions in trying to bring law firms to their knees, colleges to their knees, federal employees, students, et cetera, is anti-free speech, anti-opportunity, and fear for themselves and their futures if they speak out. Even congresspeople could be subject in the future, I'm sure, with some of the ways we're seeing this Justice Department act with questions about their speech. Our president has sued every broadcasting company almost, and they've gone after CNN, they've gone after NBC, and they pick some of these fringe people to pick on the Ukrainian president about his attire. It's bizarre what's going on in our country, and I'm concerned. They try to silence and shake down those who don't conform to whatever the president thinks. We need to understand that his review of the Smithsonian exhibits and other African-American museum and saying there was too much emphasis on how bad slavery was. I don't know how you could find anything good about slavery, and Edwin Starr, who's a singer, would tell you, slavery like war, there's absolutely nothing good about it. So we shouldn't be trying to. Professor Kay, how would you compare, from your expertise, how we evaluate and compare with relative states of freedom of expression written in the United States? Where do you see the comparisons?
Well, I think right now we're at a very dismal place in the United States, but I do think that it's also worth thinking a bit about some of the issues that Mr. Farage raised. So, for example, he mentioned the issue of a law against Islamophobia, but there's also a lot of discussion about laws against anti-Semitism and against other attacks on people on their status, on the basis of their religion and so forth. Those are actually valuable conversations to have. But you can't just sort of pick and choose which censorship or which restrictions are okay and which are not. You really need to have a general view as to what's appropriate. And I think, again, the chairman's point about censorship being a focus on criticism is the appropriate one. And to the extent that we can make that comparison, which country is really doing more, or which countries are really doing more to tamp down, to silence critics, that's the harm to our democracy. And right now I see that more in the United States than I see in Europe or the UK.
Thank you, Professor. And I'd just like to say to you, welcome. I have a lot of British friends and respect for Britain. I have a great time when I'm there, but I'm happy we won the war.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The statement that Trump is bringing us to the edge of being an autocratic state in and of itself disproves the premise of that statement. Think about that. It's absurd. Under the First Amendment, the general proposition is that government should not be regulating the content of its citizens' speech. You have the opposing idea that it's the responsibility of government to decide not only what its citizens should think, but what content they are allowed to see and engage with. To some, the reality of the government regulation of speech may sound like it's a distant, authoritarian notion that won't come to the United States of America, but I would ask you to just think back again. I'm reminded of Orwell's 1984. Think of the memory hole that people are trying to memory hole right now some even on this panel, sir, who don't want you to realize how bad a government can be when it attempts to censor right here in the United States. For instance, President Obama, this is from an article I'd asked for unanimous consent. President Obama has been the most aggressive administration in history, not only going after whistleblowers, but after pursuing reporters who write their stories. How about this one, the Biden legacy? How about this whole stack, and I'll put these in just a second, is convenient to memory hole what the Biden administration did, what they did to suppress dissent and contrary opinion. I'll get into that in a second. The actions of European governments show that the type of censorship by government is not only possible, but very much doable. Under the guise of public safety, government officials in Europe have suppressed and arrested individuals who have simply engaged in political speech that is arbitrarily deemed to be unspeakable by the government. This kind of regime doesn't just appear on the scene, though. It takes time to develop. And we've seen it here, and that's why I'm taking this opportunity to remind you that FISA must be reformed. FISA must be reformed. So, Mr. Price, you alluded to this, and so I have this document right here that compares the GDP growth of EU versus the U.S. 1998 to 2023. And the U.S. has grown about 87%, almost 90%. The EU has increased its GDP by about 13%. So you have almost a 6x variable there. The question is, when you set these kind of draconian fines and you set up a system that is amorphous and almost indefinable, might it not also have some more than just even the safety, ostensible safety of the society? Might it lead to trying to regulate when you can't innovate?
I think that's very much the case, sir. We've seen it not just in the area of speech, but obviously, as we were discussing, the Digital Markets Act, data protection, and so on. And Europe is facing some very serious structural problems demographically, financially. And a lot of what I think is inspiring the DSA is what we saw from Germany beginning after the election of President Trump and after Brexit, which is to control the narrative, slow down speech. And into that, then, they're throwing a very wide net out that's affecting all kinds of legitimate speech. We talked about my client, Päivi Räsänen, in Finland, who's prosecuted for sharing a tweet from the Bible. It's absolutely outrageous. And that becomes now the standard that the DSA will set, not just for Europe, but possibly and predictably globally.
And similarly, Mr. Reed, that's what's going to happen to your app innovators. They're not going to be able to have access to 440 million people in a marketplace in Europe without having to go through essentially government censorship.
Well, I think you hit it earlier when you said that their focus has been on regulating or adding legislation. And it isn't one piece of regulation or one piece of legislation that has caused problems for our innovators, both in the UK, in the EU, and in America. It's been the stacking effect. Because if you start with one regulation, you say, I can handle that, I'll build that into my business. It's when you have one, then two, then four, then six. So what's been the biggest problem for growth has been their answer is that old quip, the beatings will continue until morale improves. We often feel that way about regulation. Innovation will get regulated until we get more innovation, and I don't think that will work out.
Thanks, Mr. Reed. Now I'll finish with you, Mr. Farage. What happened to the great countries of the West? I mean, seriously, and their liberal understanding of civil rights and the ability to speak one's mind openly without fear of arrest or censorship or abuse of harassment by the government?
I think what went wrong in many ways is we forgot why we actually had those liberties and had those freedoms in the first place. We forgot that, as I mentioned, I touched on earlier, we forgot the huge sacrifices that were made by citizens alive at that time to defend those principles against tyranny and against dictatorship. We've kind of lost our way in understanding why we are as we are. And I think that has permeated through the education system or I'm not sure we've been teaching good values. The slavery comment was made earlier. I completely understand there's nothing good about slavery. But take our country, we spent decades driving slavery off the high seas. So whilst we were perpetrators to begin with, we actually, in the end, drove it off the high seas. So we need to teach our kids a sense of balance about our history, about the sacrifice that's been made. That's my feeling.
Mr. Chairman, I have some unanimous consent.
Gentleman is recognized.
This one, GDP growth comparison EU to US 1998 to 2023. This one, Biden's press freedom legacy, empty words and hypocrisy. Massive government censorship during and about COVID from the New Civil Liberties Alliance. The Fifth Circuit agrees that federal officials unconstitutionally coerced or encouraged online censorship under the Biden administration. This one, information during the pandemic suppressed. Feds blew $267 million fighting misinformation under Biden as Trump vows to ban censorship cartel. This one, how the FBI violated the privacy rights of tens of thousands of Americans. This one, Inspector General report on FBI's FISA abuse tells us one thing: we need radical reform. This one, UK comedy writer Graham